Thank you for joining us today for a discussion on the surprising habits of high-velocity engineering teams. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with ChainGuard. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes today, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack channel to answer some of your questions in the webinar Q&A channel. We may also have some time, I hope, to answer a couple of your questions. So please do submit them through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them, if we can, towards the end of the webinar. But let's get started with some introductions. My name is Patrick Kwa, and today I'm joined by Bruce Wang, Director of Games Platform Engineering from Netflix, Katerina Zanos, Principal Machine Learning Engineer from Meta, Pooja Salpakar, Head of Engineering at Babel, and Jason Hall, Principal Engineer from ChainGuard. I'd like to invite all of you to do a short introduction and maybe something that you're excited to talk about today. So let's start off maybe with Pooja, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pooja. I lead growth engineering at Babel. I've been with Babel for over 8 years now. My teams focus on delivering growth metrics, so basically driving customer acquisition and conversion. And a big part of my role is helping engineers move fast while staying focused. So for me, high velocity isn't about rushing. It's about delivering value in tight feedback loops and clear ownership. What I'm excited about is to share a few stories about how we've built habits, but also systems that help us learn fast and deliver the impact sustainably.
Thank you very much. And I also look forward to hearing some of those stories. Let's go over to maybe Bruce, please.
Hey, I'm Bruce Wang. I've been in the industry like 25 years. I've been at Netflix almost 6. Before that, I was a startup founder, worked in a lot of different startups. Yeah, so I lead one of the engineering teams for games. Games is like a startup sitting inside a giant global media entertainment company. So it's been really fun experience kind of seeing that sort of how do you start something from 0 to 1? And so I think velocity, high performance teams, that concept is, I think, can be confusing for folks. I think you even said, Patrick, is it just the amount of code you can generate, if only? So I love busting myths as much as possible. And so I wanna bust the myth of what does it mean to be high velocity or high performance.
Excellent. And I look forward to getting to that. Thank you. Let's go over to Katerina, please.
Hi, I'm Katerina Zanos. I think, there's been a confusion because I actually just changed jobs. And I know my title here says Senior Machine Learning Engineer at Meta, which was my previous title. Now I am a Principal Machine Learning Engineer at the Walt Disney Company. So I started at Disney about a month ago. And yeah, while we were setting this up, I was still at Meta. So pardon the confusion here. But yeah, I'm fairly new at Disney. I'm doing machine learning. Like throughout my career, I've been doing that, mostly recommendation systems. At Meta, I worked on Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels, and I was there for 4 years. And before Meta, I was for 5 years at the New York Times, where I worked on different teams. I worked again on recommender systems in their personalization group, where we built like the whole personalization platform. And then I worked on their messaging platform as a tech lead. And then I worked with the newsroom to build machine learning products for how they optimize their workflow. So I've seen like velocity take different shapes and forms, be impacted in different ways at different organizations. So I think what I can bring to the conversation today is like how the constants I've seen through at different organizations, and also like what impacts velocity, like based on how the organization is set up. And I'm excited to meet you all and discuss the topic today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Katerina. And over to Jason.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jason. I'm a principal engineer at ChainGuard. I've been at ChainGuard for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I spent a long time at Google. So I have some experience in larger organizations, and ChainGuard is much smaller. I'm excited to talk to you all and discuss high velocity engineering teams, both what they are, what they aren't, what we've seen go well, what we've seen go not well. Yeah, I'm excited to get started.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And welcome to all of our panelists today. And so today, it's been very interesting because if we think about the last few years, organizations have had shrinking budgets. We've had Gen I pressure from all aspects of technology and organizations, and also an increasingly unstable business landscape. So there's more pressure on teams to deliver fast. And so many engineering leaders have that pressure to go fast, maybe to cut corners. And that seems to contrast with research and maybe what high velocity teams seem to do. So I look forward to hearing from our experienced leaders. And before we start, why don't we start with the first question, which is, what do you define as high velocity? And how do you know a team is there? So let's maybe start with Bruce.
Yeah, it's funny because I was like, I don't like this high velocity. I'd rather have high performing teams rather. But so I kind of think of that when I equate high velocity with high performing. And when you frame it in that way, I think it's important because speed is not the only thing, right? It's about delivering impact, right, quickly. And so like speed, like you said, for what? That's the big question, right? And so for me, great performing teams, high performing teams that has, high velocity is moving towards the right business like investments, is building the right thing and delivering value to customers, right? And you said something really important, which is like, and I struggle with this with myself and my teams, is like, and if it doesn't work, what are you shipping? You could ship a lot of broken code, and if it's down all the time, what does it matter, right? Like no one can use it. And so I feel like there's this kind of, I think, disconnect between speed is just pumping out stuff, but I think it's pumping out for the right value and at high quality. And honestly, that is the balance you have to have. And if you just only focus on code output, you're actually not a good engineer. So that's kind of my definition.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's maybe hear from Katarina, because you've got a lot of different experience across many companies.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think like I completely relate to what Bruce just described. For me, velocity is basically how much meaningful impact we create for the time we invest. It translates to how fast we are able to iterate and change direction without drama and having hopefully to redo most of the work. It's about our ability to take complex work and slice it into increments we can easily test with strong observability by leveraging maybe like feature flags, metrics, or alerts, so that each step teaches us something, so that, even if that something doesn't ship, it's still a valuable thing to know. Like, okay, why that didn't ship? Why did we have to kill this? Or why did we have to change direction? So yeah, I also don't think of velocity as the number of lines of code or Jira story points. I measure it by tests and learning loops. And again, like I say tests because I work on machine learning, so we do a lot of A/B testing. And for us, this is like the unit we use like to measure, okay, how much throughput, what our throughput. So yeah, how many experiments we ran, what we learned, and how quickly we acted on it, whether we shipped it or killed it.
Wonderful. And some very clear measurable things there as well. So thank you. What's your perspective on this, Jason?
Yeah, I think completely agree with both Bruce and Katarina so far. I think part of the interesting distinction I think we're drawing is the difference between velocity and speed. Speed is the easiest thing to measure, right? Like how many lines of code or how many story points or how many releases, how often do we do things. But the definition of velocity is actually speed toward a direction, right? Like I can hey, if you want 100,000 lines of garbage code, man, am I the guy to ask for that? I can write 100,000 lines of garbage code and it will provide no customer value and it will, you know, explode the second it hits production. But that's not really what we're here to do, right? Like we're here to do things quickly in a direction. I think Katerina also made a really good point about being able to quickly change directions, right? Like having fast feedback loops to say, hey, I did something quickly, I did an experiment, I tried a new thing. It mostly worked, it kind of worked, you know, let's tweak it and move this way. That's a much better driver of long-term velocity than planning a year and a half worth of work and pretending that, you know, a year and a half worth of work will just get done without interruption or without changes to the plan or changes to the landscape or changes to the business. So it's really, really important for long-term velocity to be able to, you know, set a goal, set a thing you want to do, but also regularly test whether you're in that direction right now, whether the decision you made last week is actually making you successful in the long term. I think those are lots of the secrets of high velocity teams. Unfortunately, a lot of that's really hard to measure, not as easy to measure as lines of code or Jira points or, you know, things like that.
Excellent, thank you. And I love the addition of the reminder about that direction side with velocity versus speed. So thank you. Let's hear from Pooja.
I think agree with all other panelists that are like speaking about high performance versus high velocity, right? In a way, like high velocity is a subset of a high performance team. And if we have the focus, right, on where we are moving, if we have that goalpost clear, then I think having high velocity team moving towards a common goalpost is what leads to, you know, high performance teams. So focus is sort of a multiplier for speed here, which is what, you know, Jason was also talking about in terms of garbage code versus actual value for the customer. One of the things that I've also learned in growth engineering is that identifying sort of repeat patterns and where engineers are spending time on doing mundane tasks and sort of automating that is also like an immediate low-hanging way of addressing velocity or addressing challenges that teams are struggling. And not just for, when I say team, not just engineering, it could also be stakeholders, and then their lives get easier. So that is also a perspective that I think I've learned here in growth engineering.
Fantastic, great perspective, and love the idea of like automating those repetitive tasks and sort of removing that friction from teams to enable speed. So it sounds like a lot of the panelists here have a very similar approach to thinking about velocity and really thinking about performance and impact. And this panel is about highlighting the habits behind high velocity teams. So let's hear about some of your perspectives on what you think essential healthy habits are, or perhaps what your non-negotiables would be. So Pooja, I know you've got a lot of different teams. So what are some of your non-negotiables with all of those teams?
I think anti-patterns are very easy to spot as well, right? I think what Katerina was saying, that if we have the right system built for monitoring, for observability, for ensuring that what focus we have set is either we are moving it or we are completely going in the wrong direction, testing faster, failing faster, right? So I think one of the anti-patterns that I see is being tied to your projects, right? So if you just see that, oh, but I'm this close to just like making it through. No, if it's not working, it's not working. So I think that is one of the areas where I would say is just to be careful of, to not be married for anyone, right? Not just engineers, but for it to be married to your project. The other patterns that I see in teams, especially distributed teams, because that's where most of my team structure is to sort of be focused on challenges of time zones, right? Oh, but I shipped a PR and it wasn't reviewed for 2 days because so and so struggle, or I tried to get to this person, but they're on vacation, so how do I move fast now? So sort of like only focusing on the challenges of time zone is also a sort of an anti-pattern I see, as opposed to how do we flip the narrative and use the challenge for our benefit, right? Design systems around time zone challenges that would help us move fast, not slow, which I'm happy to go in depth of in some of my examples later.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bruce, I mean, you're building a startup within a big tech giant. So what are some of your non-negotiables about making sure you can move fast?
Yeah, there's so many. I think what Katarina and Pooja talked about, that kind of learning model of like, what are we learning and moving and like correcting direction appropriately. You know, a lot of what we're still trying to do is figuring out product market fit, right? And so like, you know, you're really testing the market and seeing what fits and what doesn't. But you're also in a very established market within gaming. So there's really well-known patterns already. And so for us, it's really figuring out like what's novel and then what is like you know, table stakes, right? And we kind of have to do both. And so for me, having that like learning mentality is a non-negotiable, right? Like just, hey, we're trying to figure out something, let's iterate fast, move on. One challenge I've seen, if we're talking about atom patterns, is people like, oh, I don't want to throw away code, we got to build for scale. I'm like, yeah, but we have like 0 customers, so I don't know what we're building scale for. But it's right? Because you can't ignore that, because if this game blows up, we'll actually have to deal with scale. And at our size, it would be very bad for our reputation if it just falls apart, right? And so I think it's really that, like, how do you take incremental steps, like iterate quickly to figure out, okay, this works, now we really expand it out, right? And I tell people the non-negotiable for me, you know, outside of that learning agenda, is also to really think about tensions that exist in every situation. And so if you don't recognize the tensions, you will then take the easy path, right? You just be like, well, I'm just going to pump out a lot of code. Well, what about quality? Well, I'm just going to focus on quality. Well, what about delivering value? And all of a sudden, now you're competing against each other. And I think for me, for the team to be high velocity and high performing, has to recognize the tensions and be able to navigate it.
Great. And it reminds me a little bit of like thinking deliberately about trade-offs and where you want to be with some of those and not just blindly following one or the other. And you've talked a lot about learning. So Katarina, what are your non-negotiables for sort of cultivating that learning or ensuring high velocity?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there are 3 non-negotiables for me. And the first one is what Pooja already alluded to, like in her previous response. So I think you should automate anything you think like you see being done manually and repeatedly. So for example, I started at Disney just like a month ago, and one of the first things I noticed was that our data scientists for the A/B tests we are running, they are doing like manual steps for each test to gather the data so that they're then able to run the analysis. And I was able to find that out through Jira. So, you know, there is a good use of for Jira because you see the tickets like going in there. It's like the same ticket every sprint. What's happening here? So there's a good use for that. But then I'm like, okay, this should be automated. Let's figure this out. So one thing, okay, the tech, like find out what are the things that are repeated and automate those. And, you know, maybe it's faster to do them manually in the short term, but then how much time are you cumulatively like sacrificing to do this manual work? So let's automate whatever we can. Second, identify the bottlenecks in the delivery process. Like one other thing I see is like many times you have like 1 or 2 people working on a service or on a system, and a third person comes in and they want to contribute to the system or service, and they're like, oh wait, like we have to review your code, like this code cannot, like we have to test it end to end to dev, like, and then maybe ship to prod, and then 2 weeks go by and this MR PR is still hanging there waiting for the blessing of whoever is like owning that service or system. No, this like has to be like, it can't be that way. Like you have to remove that bottleneck. And thirdly, I would say like remove single points of failures, which in my opinion often are engineers themselves. So if somebody goes off and like builds something on their own, that probably they are just like making progress on their own with little observability from the team, that can continue on. Like my headphone fell off my ear. So yes, like I think that you need to identify who these people are, and basically work with them to allow for like more incremental contributions that can also be reviewed by the whole team, so that everybody knows, okay, what's happening. If that person leaves, what happens to what they've built so far? And then they can't like just go on like for 2 months with like nobody knowing what they're doing. Like you need to understand like what's happening and whether this thing is going to work or not work. And if it's not working, pivot direction. So yeah, to recap, 3 non-negotiables for me: automate what you can, remove the bottlenecks, and 3, remove the single point of failures.
Fantastic. Thank you. And very well summarized. With the point of bottlenecks, in case anyone hasn't read them, definitely recommend The Goal or the Phoenix Project, talking about finding bottlenecks and value streams. What's your perspective, Jason, about non-negotiables?
Yeah, as you asked the question, I instinctively wrote one word down, and it was trust. And then as the other panelists were answering, I was able to flesh that into more than just one word. I think trust is like the foundational layer of all of the things that make a team, not even an engineering team, right? Like a team of people rowing a boat have to trust each other. And I think the reason for that, and Pooja, I think, touched on it, I think maybe you all did, was like learning from mistakes and changing, and even what we were talking about before about small incremental changes in a direction, but changing them over time. In order to have that flexibility, you have to have humility to say that what I tried before wasn't right. And you have to have humility to be able to say, you know, I thought this was going to work. I thought I'd be able to get this done by the end of the month. I won't actually. It's this other thing. And in order to safely have that humility on a team, you have to have the trust of your team. You have to have the trust not only of your, you know, coworkers and peers, people below you, people above you in the org chart, and you have to have trust up and down the org chart as well, right? Like when leadership changes the strategy and says, you know, we used to do this and now we're doing this, the rest of the org also has to trust that, like, you know, that change in strategy is important and good. And you know, I think so flexibility is the like tactically important non-negotiable. In order to have flexibility, you need to have humility, and in order to have humility, you need to have trust, sort of at all levels and all directions in the organization. When that works well, it works very, very well. And when it doesn't work at all, nothing works at all. Basically, you spend all of your time infighting, politics, you know, things like that, all because, you know, the trust was eroded at some point. So that's my non-negotiable.
Yeah, sorry, Pat, I wanted to double down on what Jason said when I talk about learning culture. It's that trust and then accountability. I think those two things have to be interweaved together, right? To, you know, have that community, but also be like, hey, we can do better next time, right? And so I really like, I mean, it's such a foundational thing and we keep on talking about it, but it's hard to do. Sorry for interrupting.
No, great.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Please, Jason.
Trust is super hard, right? Trust is like the hardest thing. It's easy to squander. It's easy to lose. It takes forever to build, and, you know, sometimes a second to lose. So all the more important not to lose it. Hold on to it while you have it.
Yeah, I love the very humane approach as well, really thinking about that. And this is something that a lot of the listeners here or watchers can actually focus on, because that's one of the roles, I think, of leaders and managers, of really fostering and focusing on that trust, both, as you mentioned, Jason, within teams, but also up and across the organization. Let's hear, I'd love to hear one of your stories, Pooja. So, you know, you were talking about friction or trying to, you know, automate very manual things. Maybe you could share a recent story where you found some of that within your organization and what you did to help accelerate your teams.
I really hope you're enjoying this video. Do you know Lead Dev offers way more than this?
I'm a fan of the Lead Dev newsletter. I find really practical knowledge about leadership.
Then I was like, oh, there is this big community here doing all of these content, so let me figure out a little more, let me dig in a little, what do you have?
So make sure you check out leaddev.com.
I'll give you two. Right? So one of the stories, right, is focused around automation specifically, right? And so we had at Babel, we had onboarding flows or onboarding funnels that were designed for region-specific markets. And it scaled while it was helpful to have learnings from different markets. But at some point, we realized that audiences' behavior are sort of consolidating more and more, which led to us consolidating all of the code base into a single flow or a single funnel. And that not only helped us unlock faster experimentation, but then also made us move fast in terms of shipping things from one single point, or having engineers be focused on maintaining one piece instead of 5 pieces of code bases, right? That turned into a huge opportunity for my teams. And what we did was basically designed an internal tool that marketeers would use to design their own funnel, right? It led to minimal engineering involvement in shipping experiments, and the learnings that we would have from just moving questions here and there, or just copy changes, or like image changes, none of that would go through engineers. It was just product and marketing, collaborating on these changes. So these are sort of the automations that I was talking about in terms of, are my engineers doing the same two-pointer story every sprint about designing experiments, doing that month over month, and we're having similar learning, if not same? That was sort of a point where we said, let's focus on this for 3 sprints, and then we'll never have to do it again. The other example I have is more on time zone specific things, right? So my teams are distributed across 3 time zones. And what that sort of an epiphany moment I had was, we could use this for near 24-hour coverage on call, and no one will have to do after hour on call, right? And how can I enable teams to do that? So bring teams closer, share knowledge, share about our recent progress, and build that culture about learning from each other, not just about your own team or your own project. Sort of understand what's happening from acquisition until conversion on the technical landscape as well. Share that across multiple teams to build that that coverage for on-call shifts, which has now reflected in our system's reliability, right? So those are the examples that I can definitely say that once you identify a challenge, how do you make lemonade from those lemons, right?
I love it. And I love the inversion of enabling your users within your organization to sort of reduce the demand on your engineering teams, but also then taking advantage of the different time zones and seeing that as an opportunity. So thank you. Bruce, I'd love to hear an example. One of the things that you talked about was really about this balancing of tensions of trying to test bets, but also think about scalability. Maybe you can walk us through a recent discussion or something where you talk about how do you find that balance with your team?
So many discussions. I think what we're trying, especially since we're talking about high velocity or high speed, like I think what we're trying to figure out is, how do we make decisions quickly and move fast towards something, experiment, and then learn, and then figure out, is that where we want to scale, right? And so there's a particular example with, I mean, it's public. We worked on Squid Game Unleashed in 2024, and the time between when we decide to add non-member experience, which is a complete, like, we don't do that at Netflix, right? Like, we don't look at non-member experience in that way. For us, from the time to decide and then push it out and then deliver it in time for season 2 launch was like really fast, right? And so that's an example of like, make the decision quickly, move forward, learn from it, and then determine, is that the right solution? And then we turned out it wasn't quite right? There was actually a lot of friction with the solution we implemented. So we went with a version 2 that then came out later, earlier this year. And so I think that's that kind of model of like, can you make decisions quickly on picking a direction? Can you test it? and then figure out what's the scale version, right? And then on top of that, what was really fascinating is the engineering teams kind of raised their hands and like, hey, the branching strategy we have for our SDK is starting to become unwieldy because of the number of experiments we're driving. So that's an example of that tension balance where, okay, you're going fast. Now you're realizing those paper cuts and bottlenecks is starting to really hurt you, right? And now engineering has to have the agency to then go fix those bottlenecks. Because if you think like, well, we'll just like eat it, like it's just going to slow you down, right? And so that's then example where because of us moving fast and iterating and finally getting to that stage of scale, a little bit more scale in this area, we then started running into like engineering bottlenecks that had to be addressed, right? And so then we're like, okay, here's our new branching strategy to support both stable builds and experimental builds, right? And so that's an example of like that flow of the system working, right? Your product velocity is driving engineering velocity is driving product velocity, right? Then now you have that virtuous cycle. And I think a lot of times it's broken. And there's a lot of Q&A questions about it. So we'll probably talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll get to one of them definitely. But I do want to pick up on one of the things I heard you say, which was about making decisions quicker, because I think one thing about a lot of engineers is they like to think, right? They like to have the perfect decision. And how do you encourage your teams? Like, what would be some practical tips for people here listening to help your teams maybe make decisions quicker?
Man, that's hard way. I don't know. I take this philosophy of like only the paranoid survive, and it's a little bit of like what's happening out there and how do we keep up with what's going on. And so every time we take too long, it's like we're losing daylight to implement and we've actually seen this problem where in January we knew we need to do something, but it took us to March or April to decide. And then all of a sudden the ship date was shrink down to 2 months. So I'm like, we caused our own situation where we only have a few weeks left to deliver because we took so long to decide. And so I think it's like, how do we get faster and make the commitment and start working on it, right? And I think what ends up happening is we like to then blame and saying, oh, see, it took so long and we're just waiting. Now it's like, no, but we could have done something about that, right? And so I think it's a little bit about taking it within your control, right? That like kind of saying, hey, when we make those fast decisions, we're sort of taking it so we get to decide, not some mysterious other, which I think it's easier, right? It'd be like, oh, someone's waiting. I'm waiting for approval from the boss or product or whatever. It's like, why aren't we just making the calls and moving forward?
Great, thank you. I love it. And maybe Katarina, I mean, you worked at Meta and they used to have a saying of move fast and break things, which moved to move fast with stable infrastructure. So how do you help your engineering teams maybe like move fast with like decision making here?
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely learned that to do at Meta, actually. Yeah, like, so I think ground all of your decisions on data. Like you need to understand, like, even if you're an engineer who doesn't work with data like directly, maybe you're building, your thing is like building API services or building features. Like, I think like you should figure out like, okay, what are the data that would impact like my system? Like, where does that data live? And like, how can I run some analysis to understand what the landscape looks like? If I were to ship that service, like what are my dependencies? In our case, like for example, at Meta, it was like, okay, I have like a dozen different machine learning models I could try. And of course, like a machine learning, a model can then have like other parameters that you need to tune. Like, so how do we decide like across all of these different options, what's the best thing for our product? So there are two things that I rely on heavily, and I encourage other engineers on my team to do as well. Is like, first take a week and run an analysis on and essentially learn from the data. What's the story the data tells you? I also have a journalism background, so for me that's kind of like also touches on that. Like, let's understand like what's the story here. Let the data guide you. And secondly, I guess like maybe that's like that, I guess like that applies both on machine learning engineering and software engineering. Build an evaluation pipelines in advance, so that when your system is ready, you can evaluate it and understand, like, at least offline, how is this thing going to perform? Can we simulate like this, like how, like the performance, or like how it's going to work with other systems? Maybe you can like get some user data and you can see, okay, what are like, how will the system respond with that data? Like if we were to put in production, even if it's not yet, like how would it do? How would it work in that environment? So that kind of like tells you. And I think like you can find like some answers even before you ship to production, so that at least you don't have to ship to production to get the answers, and get at least some answers beforehand.
I love it. And you know, one of the things I heard you say was like the you know, the pipeline part, and I think one interesting aspect I feel has helped a lot of teams optimize velocity is like container technology. And Jason, you're an expert in that area, so I'd love to maybe hear your perspective on maybe how you think containers have impacted velocity of teams and why.
Yeah, I think the main benefit to velocity of containers is just a technology. Like any technology, it can be used for good or bad. But I think that the main benefit to velocity is in being able to decouple organizations and teams, so that they can release changes on a different cadence than other teams, release either faster or slower or just differently, however they want. This doesn't solve all problems. There are still problems. We are still humans making code together, but at least not being tied to the sort of traditional, you know, pre-containers model of like, we do a yearly release. We have to, you know, ship the golden release on CDs that need to be sent to the factory by this day. Being able to, first of all, deploy more quickly, more often, leads you to better small incremental changes that you can test and be flexible and gather data, gather feedback, and helping with decoupling two teams from being able to release on their own lets them make their decisions in their own timelines, right? So you don't have to wait for another team to get their work done to get your work done. When it goes well, it doesn't always go well, but it at least gives you the opportunity to not have like one monolithic yearly mega release, which you know, has a huge blast radius and makes everyone afraid of that decision to cut the release, or, you know, makes that a very high impact, in a bad way, high impact decision, instead of a series of small, you know, well, yeah, this tiny like 5-line change. Of course, we all agree that's a good idea. Let's ship that. I think containers as a technology was a big benefit in the human process of releasing code in small shippable increments.
Great, thank you. And I mean, you know, you probably work with a lot of organizations using containers, and you said it's a tool that could be used for good or bad. So maybe what are some ways that organizations use containers that actually slow teams down?
Well, you still need to coordinate, right? Like there's no magic bullet. It's not like I put my code in containers, and so I don't have to talk to any other people to ship it. I wish that was the case, but you know, I think I've seen it go poorly where teams get too exuberant about the technology of containers, the technology of microservices, the technology of fast release cycles. They get, you know, too lost in the sauce on it, and start to say, you know, we're just going to have, you know, hourly releases, whether or not they pass QA, whether or not they're coordinated with anyone else. My team's going to go do this fast, and if it breaks that other team, I don't care. That's an awful way to live, and that would have been an awful way to live in the monolith world too. It just would have been slower and more costly in the monolith world. So I think it doesn't solve the human problem of coordination and making sure that you don't make a change that breaks some other team's assumption on your service. And also, I think that it goes poorly when people over microservice, when people people end up what's the word, decomposing in everything into like, this service only adds 2 numbers and does nothing else, right? Like, that's silly. There's no, please don't do that. So that's a failure mode I've seen a few times, over microservice exuberance.
Excellent. And I think it just is a good reminder of like the right level of abstraction and thinking very carefully about those interactions across teams to hide those implementation things that you want to be able to change, but not break other teams. So that's fantastic. Yeah. I'd like to maybe move over to picking up a question from the audience. And there's one that was related to what we talked about with the definition of high velocity, because I think this is about impact. So this one says, impact is great, but it's often co-owned with product as well. So how do you define velocity specifically to engineering, and any metrics? What's your advice if you're in that situation? Who would like to start?
I wanted to say something really important here, because there's another question about that. Co-owned is the operative word here. We do it together as one team, right? If you're going to go deliver value, it's product and engineering together. They're not separate entities. And I think when we treat them that way, it goes very poorly, right? Because that's when the finger pointing comes in. And so I wanted to like really hammer that home, is like, I know it seems very basic, but it's a human thing. How do we like do it together, right? And so making sure that the impact and testing is with product, not separate outside of product. And product should understand that engineering has certain limitations in terms of how they work. And so I wanted to use the co-owned piece, is like, is it truly co-owned, right? Is it truly like acting as one team? I think that's actually much harder than people realize.
Great, thank you. Pooja, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I want to touch upon the metrics topic, which is part of the question. And I agree fully that product and engineering should co-own feature a delivery, right? So which is why the success metrics of that feature should also reflect both. It's not just about what uplift did you have in conversion, but also what sort of impact did it have on performance, right? Did it actually go up? Did it go down? If you are doing an A/B experiment, attaching health metrics, not just product health metrics, but also engineering health metrics to define whether we need to, whether we are ready to deliver at scale or we need to iterate again. So those are sort of metrics I would attach to any product feature being delivered. In terms of team metrics, we can go at length. There could be another panel talk about engineering metrics and team KPIs, and how do we do CI/CD optimizations? How do we do like team ways of working to reflect on team metrics? But I'm not talking about that right now. I'm just talking about product co-owning engineering features.
Katerina, what do you have to say on this topic?
I think, yeah, I agree. Like when we say co-owned, we need to like work together. And I want to clarify something here. I think like I've seen product roles essentially being materialized as, I have a hunch and I think we should try this, which never goes well with engineers. So for me, a good product owner, product manager, whatever they are, like I think it's somebody who, I'm going to go back to the data part. They have, maybe they didn't do the market research themselves, but they're able to get that data and understand where the opportunity is, and then bring that to the engineering team and explain, this is the reasoning why I think we should build ABC. And we're building this together, how we're going to do this, and then get feedback from the engineers on, okay, this is like the investment we need to put here in order to do this, that what you're asking. And then essentially like decide, okay, what is the right ROI for us to like move forward with whatever project we decide on. So it's not about somebody coming in and having just a hypothesis, not grounded anywhere, and just asking the engineers to execute on. It's a collaboration where somebody's like actually grounds what they want to prioritize on some real data, some like real the market value, position, opportunity they can find, they can show, and then work with the engineers together to make sure that they invest on the right things. Because we might have the right opportunity, but if it takes us a year to build, maybe that's not the right thing to prioritize here. So I think it's like finding this balance to be able to, deliver like the best output.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really love all the insights. We are going to have to wrap up the webinar because we've hit the end of our session. I want to thank you all panelists for sharing all your wonderful stories, practical tips and advice. I've certainly learned a few things to keep in mind when thinking about velocity and also what velocity even means in this context. I'd like to invite everyone over who's watching this to the Lead Dev Slack channel and to the webinar Q&A channel. This has been posted in the comments or the chat. So please head there and please continue the discussion. And if you'd like your questions answered there, our panelists will be joining us. Thank you very much all for joining, and we hope to see you next time.